Few games among the Nintendo Switch 2 launch lineup can match Cyberpunk 2077 in putting the system through its paces. It's a staple of our PC benchmarking suite for a good reason. The open world design is a great stressor for any CPU, while simultaneously its effects-heavy battles present a gauntlet for GPU resource as well. It's a great all-rounder, and with that in mind, this Switch 2 release has clearly been a big undertaking for developer CD Projekt Red. The port is handled in-house by CDPR, purpose-built for Switch 2's ARM-based architecture with unique optimizations to get it running. Also, remarkably, this is the Ultimate Edition of the game, meaning Switch 2 includes both the core adventure and the more taxing Phantom Liberty expansion. When Phantom Liberty arrived in 2023, this expansion proved too demanding to qualify for a last-gen PS4 or Xbox One release, and rather, it focused on current-gen PS5, Xbox Series X and S systems. And yet, here it is running in all its glory on Switch 2 today. To cut to the chase, Switch 2 offers a truly viable way to enjoy Cyberpunk, either in a portable format or docked under a TV. However, CDPR has shot for the stars in its ambition to include the Phantom Liberty expansion as well, and it's here that Switch 2 hits some technical limits, with frame rates struggling as we explore its newer Dogtown region. Still, that aside, there's a lot to admire in the game's engineering for Nintendo's new console overall, and just how competitive it is in comparison with the other consoles. So, where exactly does Switch 2 slot in visually between the last-gen PS4 and the more advanced Xbox Series S and PS5 versions? And what's the state of its frame rate as it targets 30 FPS in its quality mode, or alternatively 40 FPS via a performance mode? Let's find out. First up, the basics. Switch 2 offers 4 main configurations, a 30fps quality mode, plus a 40fps performance mode, with both available while playing docked or as a portable. In terms of differences between these modes, the biggest point to mention really is in image quality. Switch 2 is entirely unique in the console space for using a custom form of Nvidia's DLSS upscaler, rather than AMD's FSR2 on current-gen systems, or CDPR's temporal AA solution on last gen, and this is present in all 4 setups on Switch 2. In docked play, both modes target 1080p via DLSS, with quality mode rendering at a resolution of between 720p to 1080p. In docked performance mode, meanwhile, this goes to a more flexible 540p to 1080p range in order to sustain 40fps. Inevitably, Switch 2 in its portable state drops these figures even further, down to a 450p to 810p range in quality mode, targeting 810p via DLSS, and further still with a 360 to 720p range in performance mode, in that case reconstructing to 720p via DLSS. It's no surprise to see these resolution scales so aggressively for portable play. After all, Switch 2's Tegra T239 GPU clock speeds drop from 1GHz while docked to just 560MHz in its portable state, and something has to give. Generally speaking, for static shots, DLSS at least does a great job in transforming the raw pixel input of each mode into a sharp, clear result. That said, it's not perfect, and heavy action with lots of motion sees DLSS struggling to hide those lower resolution values at times. Racing through Night City's busy streets, for example, the image is notably blurrier, it's easier to catch blocking artifacts, and temporal noise is in clearer view along cable lines overhead. The good news is that, outside of resolution, there are very few differences between docked and portable play in core visual settings. Using the video capture feature from Switch 2 itself, while played as a portable, we get a good enough look at all modes in comparison. Shadows, textures, SSR, and world draw are closely matched no matter how you play. The only catch is that reflections in mirrors, especially, take a hit in clarity while using the performance mode in either state, but otherwise the world presents itself in an identical fashion. With that in mind, how does Switch 2 compare to other consoles? In some respects, the Switch 2 release is like no other, notably in its use of DLSS of course, but also its unique method for rendering shadows. In other respects, it borrows settings from both last and current-gen consoles to create a mixture, a kind of hybrid setup that best suits the system's specs. To start with the advantages first, Switch 2 runs at the same texture quality setting as PS5. Impressively, the availability of 9GB of usable RAM gives it the freedom to present ground textures, decals on walls, and clothing at an equivalent setting to base PS5 in most cases. By extension, that means Switch 2 often pushes beyond the last-gen PS4 and even Xbox Series S in this aspect. In fairness, many textures are universal in quality between all four consoles here, but where there is a difference, like the freckles and stubble on Jackie's face, Switch 2 simply uses a higher setting than Series S. The second win for Switch 2 is in image quality. The move to DLSS as an upscaler reaps huge rewards next to PS4, which renders at a range of 720p to 900p with CDPR's TAA method. Fine details like rain resolve with greater sharpness against the dark night sky, plus there's less obvious banding artifacts on fences as characters pass by in the foreground. In short, the DLSS method on Switch 2 is simply more adept in interpreting the details it wants to keep in place, while equally denoising the image where there's obvious artifacts. Notably, Cyberpunk's screen space reflections suffer from a grainy, shimmering artifact on base PS4, which is nicely cleaned up via DLSS to create a more stable result on Switch 2. To sweeten the deal, it also resolves distant detail like foliage and buildings with greater clarity in general. Even when compared to Xbox Series S on its own 30fps quality mode, rendering at 1440p in this case, Switch 2 remarkably holds its own by virtue of a better upscaling method. Again here, artifacting on SSR is cleaned up, and the image is sharper in static moments next to the Series S release. However, there are instances inevitably where the lower base resolution of Switch 2 gets the better of it, resulting in more aliasing on hard edges. There are limits then, but it's impressive that Switch 2 is capably trading blows with Series S here, and even at times surpassing it. Next along, in terms of streaming in the complex detail of Night City, its market stalls, shop fronts, and NPCs, Switch 2 is a far better optimized release than PS4. It benefits from the higher bandwidth access to its internal storage or expandable Express microSD, whereas PS4's now rather creaky mechanical HDD is often a bottleneck in allowing key details to appear in good time. Admittedly, while stood still, basic level of detail is comparable between the two machines, and it's often hard to split them. The real challenge though is in sprinting or driving at pace, and here PS4 is often painfully slow to load textures, geometry, or even crucial collision logic in bustling areas. It's possible to wait 20 to 30 seconds for some of these elements to render in, and this issue genuinely affects its playability to this day. Switch 2, on the other hand, plays out a lot closer to the Series S release in avoiding such visible pop-in, and consistently drawing in world assets on time. For all its advantages, Switch 2 does have some limitations too. Let's start with the big one, that NPC and vehicle density are roughly on par with the base PS4 version. It's still very respectable, but it essentially means that traffic in Night City is less likely to build up to outrageous gridlock levels, while market crowds have a similar density to last-gen consoles. By comparison, PS5 and Series S use a higher rung setting for both NPC and vehicle density, often filling its roads with more bustling activity on average. It's a concession for Switch 2 that almost certainly caters to a CPU limit and to better lock down 30fps or 40fps in the performance mode. Still, what Switch 2 achieves here is impressive. The second limit relates to shadow rendering. Switch 2 appears to use a unique setting, and notably, interior shadows are improved on Switch 2 compared to PS4, with sharper character silhouettes from spotlights. But conversely, outdoor shadows projected from the sun are a step back from PS4's in their overall effect. The result is that there's a less stable, more pixelated look to shadows on Switch 2, such as those stemming from trees overhead. Likewise, shadows from pixel-thin details like metal bars or barbed wire also suffer from using a low resolution form of the effect outdoors. Finally, a more obvious filtering cascade for shadows is also visible on Switch 2, breaking up any long shadow lines stretching far to the distance. Interestingly, and on that note, interior shadows fall short of the setting used on Xbox Series S, and there's more aliasing on Nintendo's system there, but it's still a decent turnout. And of course, outdoor global shadows on Switch 2 are nowhere close to the Series S quality preset, or PS5's for that matter. Looking to performance, Switch 2 makes good on its promise of hitting 30 FPS in its quality mode, for the main Cyberpunk adventure at least. For most driving or shootouts in the first Maelstrom's mission, it conforms to an evenly frame-paced 30 FPS cap. Odd frame drops are possible as the DRS adjusts, but it's rarely egregious enough to detract from the experience. Next to PS4 in all the very same stress test areas, it's clearing the 30 FPS line, where too often PS4 runs in the mid-20s, 20 FPS or even under that. No question, this is a clear Switch 2 win in overall playability, and crucially, it avoids many of the frame time spikes seen on PS4 due to streaming bottlenecks. There are ways to brute force the red engine into drops, of course, not least our classic alleyway shootout test. Even in this case though, Switch 2's worst reading briefly goes to 28 FPS, while PS4 takes us to 20 FPS and just under. For a more extreme test, accelerated driving through the Kabuki region is a pretty surefire way to trigger major drops, and here Switch 2 shows a real limit. A sustained mid-20s reading similar to PS4's, with a traversal hitch or two for good measure. Still, this does represent the very worst case scenario in the base game, and Switch 2 is significantly ahead of PS4's reading in every other scenario. Next along, the Phantom Liberty expansion presents a much greater technical hurdle for Switch 2. Sadly, this is where we see the flip side to the Switch 2 version, and it does fall short of Series S's often stable 30 FPS reading. In short, from our very first landing in the Dogtown area, sub 30 FPS drops are much more abundant. Notable low points include an early shootout with multiple enemies, a run through its slums area, and also a drive down its besieged streets. Each of these moments sees a sustained drop into the mid-20s on Switch 2 and lower, while Series S comfortably clears 30 FPS. Worst of all, Switch 2 has frame time hitches in excess of 120 milliseconds while driving here, which genuinely makes controlling our vehicle a challenge. All of this adds some context as to why this expansion never released on last-gen consoles, because clearly for Switch 2, Phantom Liberty's more complex design makes it a taller order to run at 30 FPS. Of course, retesting the core Cyberpunk game against Series S makes for a less stark divide. Series S does clear up the Kabuki stress test and the alleyway shootouts at 30 FPS, but otherwise, both run at a matching 30 FPS for the most part. The state of Switch 2's 40 FPS performance mode is less convincing. This of course requires a 120Hz compatible TV to access, and in making that mode switch, a unique frame is rendered on every third refresh. Effectively, this gives Switch 2 the next best thing to the all-out 60 FPS performance mode seen on PS5 and Xbox Series consoles. Frames are rendered to a 25 millisecond budget in this case, in theory resulting in snappier controller response and smoother camera pans. In reality though, Switch 2's delivery of 40 FPS has rather mixed fortunes. In simpler interior areas where it does hold to 40 FPS, it's unquestionably a smoother experience, but shootouts and driving tends to drop to 30 FPS and even under. Compounding the issue is the fact that there is no VRR support to TVs during docked play either, and so these drops stick out obviously to the naked eye. In comparison to the more stable 30 FPS quality mode, it's hard to really see the benefit. The performance mode reading wavers above and even below 30 FPS more erratically, and even though we're stuck with a 33.3 millisecond render time on quality mode, it turns out that 30 FPS is simply a more realistic, dependable target for the system to hit in docked play. A final word on Switch 2's performance in portable play. It's an area that sets Switch 2 apart from the PlayStation and Xbox competition, and the good news is this. Going by eye, frame rates are broadly equivalent to the docked experience. The lowered resolutions here help to a sufficient enough degree to keep 30fps in view, though the Kabuki drive test and the Phantom Liberty expansion remain clear rough spots. Alas, I can't test this with the usual framerate tools, given that capture is limited to the compressed 30fps video generated by the Switch 2 itself. Still, even without a framerate graph, the 40fps performance mode is a clear recommendation. While in a portable state, the performance mode uses Switch 2's 120Hz LCD panel with the benefit of its integrated variable refresh rate support. VRR is not possible in docked TV play, but in this case, it helps minimize the perceptibility of drops under 40fps. It's the smoothest way to enjoy the game on Switch 2 as a result, though the catch is that once the frame rate goes below 30fps, we're outside the ideal VRR range and judder becomes visible again. Still, it's a welcome side benefit of portable play and having VRR integrated directly into Switch 2's display. Through all its pros and cons, Cyberpunk 2077 on Switch 2 is a very playable rendition of CDPR's latest work, and a true showcase of the system's technical prowess. It's early days for the console, of course, and we only expect familiarity to breed better optimized efforts from developers in the years ahead. As a launch title though, this is precisely what we love to see in any new system. It's ambitious, perhaps overly ambitious, and as an added bonus, it even has unique extras for Switch 2. The highlight is the Joy-Con mouse control support, which works brilliantly as a more accurate alternative to the traditional gamepad. Plus, there's actually stealth USB keyboard and mouse support included for a more PC-style experience. Overall, the performance issues in the Phantom Liberty portion are unfortunate, but they are at least overshadowed by the quality of the core Cyberpunk campaign. We get a hybrid of last and current gen console settings here, with Switch 2 somehow even exceeding Xbox Series S in texture quality. On balance then, it's an encouraging start for taxing open world efforts on Nintendo's new hardware, and we expect it's the first of many to come. But that's all from me today. If you did enjoy this video, feel free to like or subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell for instant notifications as any new video lands. To get a high quality version of this video and many more, check out our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net, and to get in touch directly, you know where to find me. But from me for now, thanks for watching.